Good morning and welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deana. Happy Monday. It is great to see you. I am so glad that you're there. I raced over from the other room, lost track of the time, but you all didn't. You are so good. Let's see. I hope you joined us last night for our different night, our special edition gallery night on a Sunday night. And I think it worked out really well. There was a lot of people logged on at the height of the show, I think, and maybe that accounts for the different time slot. Maybe it's nice to do stuff at different times sometimes. We are on our regular schedule this week, though, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so our usual nights, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Let me see who's here this morning. Melanie, I'm starting with your rugs because I missed putting your squirrel in last night, and that was a complete ball drop on my part. I'm good at dropping those balls. I got a lot in the air right now. I got Teddy still home from sick from school, incredibly, and not getting a ton of sleep. But we're going to make it work, and it's a great episode today. We're going to be looking at. I think I mentioned I took a bus trip with my mom last week to the Currier Museum in New Hampshire, and while I was completely amazed and blown away by their collection of art, which included a Georgia O'Keeffe, a painting of a cross that was rather unexpected. We're so used to seeing her sort of oversized, erotic looking flowers. Not that at all. So very famous sort of classic European artists, Childe Hassan, Monet. What was it? Oh, my mom's not on today. She's in our art class. There was pretty much one of everyone you can think of. Picasso. It was really exciting because it is as museums go, it's a smallish museum. And it's always remarkable to find these smaller but still very epically great, right? But just a smaller scale than like a city museum. To see the collections of art that sometimes these smaller museums house. And I know at least around New England, and let me know around your area too, because I'd be really interested in going down those rabbit holes over the winter and doing research in this area. Maybe you could help me. I'm so interested in knowing what house museums are near you and what they contain, whether there's any textiles, if it's just a lot of unexpected paintings like this Currier Museum was both. I know there's another one here in the Berkshires. What's it called? God, I talk about it all the time. I just was talking about it yesterday with somebody in person. It'll come to me. It'll come to me. It's in, I think, North Adams. But it's a house museum. And there are some of the world's best and most important paintings, and the paintings don't leave the house. Part of the will, the person who collected them and owned them said they are not to leave the house. And Williamstown, it's in Williamstown. Almost had it there. If you don't go and look at the paintings there and their whole collection of art, you don't get to see it at all. So it's interesting when these kinds of things kick up. So I do like looking at the smaller house museums because you never know what you're going to find. You don't expect to turn a corner and be face to face with a Picasso. I mean, you don't expect that, do you? Or a Monet. There was an Edward Hopper. Amazing. But the thing that really got me, and the reason I wanted to take this particular tour, was because I knew that they had the G's Bend textiles, right? They had 5 quilts that have recently been donated to the museum, and that's a really big deal. So that's the main thing that we're going to talk about today. They also had 1 quilt in the textile collection by Faith Ringgold, and she is an epically well-known, famous, and important American artist. So to have a piece of hers really is another incredible feather in the hat of the Currier Museum. So that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. Let me look at you and see who's here. Carol, great to see you in Wisconsin. Dark and damp. Here too, it is like, oh, it's like misery rain. It's just incredible, incredible rain. I had to go right around my house. I couldn't go out through the backyard because I would have been like up to my ankles in wet. It's crazy. It's crazy weather right here. Melanie, great to see you in Mount Vernon, Washington. Heidi, it looks like rain all over the world, also in Belgium. I believe it. I believe it. It is not a happy weather day today, that's for sure. April, there we go. In North Georgia, that's the place. That's where the sun is at. April, good to see you. I'm glad that you're having a sunny day. April, I keep thinking in my mind, last Christmas, right around the holidays, I think it was, I did an episode on that book called Hooking on the Hill. Do you remember that episode? I'm going to have to go back to it myself and go back to the book. But it was about a group of hookers who met at a house on a hill and hooked. And the lady who started the whole thing has since passed away, but I was told during that episode that the group still meets and hooks. I want to follow up on that because I still have it in my head to make that trip and join in that hook in if inviting myself, assuming I'm welcome, one of these days, because it's been in my mind all year and it's something I would really like to get to. I'm going to have to go back down that rabbit hole and see what I can figure out. Linda, overcast in New Jersey, I bet. Well, we're going to make it nice and bright. I got some really bright slides for you today. It's going to help a lot. Robyn, great to see you. Oh, Linda B, thumbs up. That's right, thumbs up. Please, thank you so much. Linda, it's great to see you. Doreen, Jane, great to see you. Last night was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun last night. I love our gallery night episodes. I'll tell you a little bit later about what my idea is for this coming Friday. We have been like sort of on the countdown to Halloween. We're celebrating the holidays like crazy on our channel this year. I want to celebrate everything, right? I want to celebrate everything. I want to look at design. I want to look at art. I want to look at all kinds of textiles. I want to look how everything translates to rug making and rug design. Everything does. So I'm really casting the net widely and broadly lately and looking at all kinds of things, mostly inspiration. I think that's where, as the channel evolves and as we get our group of people and our numbers go up and getting more and more feedback, it seems like the main thing that you're looking for in this channel is information and inspiration. So that's where I want to stay right in that groove, and do episodes that really foster both of those ends, getting a lot of information out there for beginners, for people who want to try new techniques as well, and getting a lot of inspiration out there, right? So yeah, I've got some ideas for some upcoming episodes that will be a lot of fun, bringing us right through to the new year. I'm almost in my mind like booked it right through already. Doreen and Jane, Linda B, Karen, great to see you. Dusting of snow last night already. Holy mackerel. Oh, of course, Melanie. I'm sorry. I missed that yesterday. Jane, Nancy, great to see you. I just sent out your wools. I hope you like them. And if you don't like any of them, let me know. I did the recipes the way I did them the first time, but every batch is a little different. So if you don't love them, you have got to let me know. I thought they were extraordinary, and I was jealous when I sent them. I do that sometimes. I put an order together and I think, I want to keep it. Can I keep it? But I just don't have the time to do orders twice right now. Otherwise, it would be so tempting. Carol, dark days are great for hooking. They are. Cat's Gallery, good morning. Linda Ann, good morning. From chilly Edmonton today. Oh, man. Quiltessa, great to see you. This is going to be a good day for you, Quiltessa, because we're looking at mostly quilts today from the textile collection. April, I talked to some of the girls that attended a group a couple of weeks ago at a workshop. I would take you there. That's fantastic. I really want to look at that, and I want to figure the hooking on the house hill. For me, I'm thinking maybe that was last Halloween, actually, because I'm picturing running that episode and having a child over my shoulder with a mask on. I'm picturing and feeling having a hat on, too, and being really hot during that episode. I bet it was Halloween. That's probably why it's coming. I think that was it. That's probably why it's coming back to me, because it was Halloween, and I just did like a Halloween type episode last night with all the rugs. April, I'll remember that. That would be wonderful. So today is going to be wonderful too. Do I want to share anything with you before I get going in my groove? I want to remind you that Wednesday is the first Design Like the Fairy Tale Illustrator or Fairy Tale Storybook. That is going to be a great class. I am working on that currently. So if you are signed up for that class, tomorrow you will receive an email with an attachment, things that you can print out if you would like to work during class. It's also possible in a recorded class like this to just listen, watch, participate if you want, ask questions if you want, and then rewatch it anytime in the future. It's just there permanently on private online. And you have the code, the people in the class have the code, and other people do not. So it's always possible to do that, and you don't have to print and work during class. It's entirely up to you. But that's coming up Wednesday and Sunday. It's one class, although you're welcome to log on for both, but it is the same class both times live, with different conversations, different interactions. They always shake out differently with a different group of people. So that should be fun. Quiltessa said, I saw that collection. I listened to a talk on it. Fascinating. Quiltessa, did you see that at the Currier Museum in New Hampshire, or you saw it somewhere else? Because these G's Bend quilts have been touring for the last, better part of a decade, ever since they were really kind of discovered. So I'm going to walk us into that a little bit. I'm excited for the class too, not tomorrow, Wednesday. You scared me. You scared. So I wanted to say, I forgot last night to tell you, I'm working on a lot of Halloween stuff too. Mostly I'm working on orders right now and shows. But I was working on one of my Halloween designs that failed epically. And I'm going to tell you why. And you're going to know why, because you know me, and you know many of the things that I do epically fail. So I was working on this design, and I brought it to Cape Cod when I took that sneaky week at the end of the summer, the last week before the kids went to school. I took off alone with the kids to the little house on the pond, and we booked it for a week. And we were just there, and I brought this design. And I had made it on a piece of tracing paper. I think it's called Popcorn Party. Other people have bought this. I haven't hooked it myself. So in my mind, great Halloween design, right? And it is a great Halloween design. I truly love the design. I like the Indian corn around the border. I like the action of the scarecrow. This feeds into the conversations we've been having at our Halloween talks, like the one last night on the history of the scarecrow. I love the design, but I screwed up the colors. So what I was trying to do, and I was hooking it in the summer. This is one of the reasons, and I know one of the sort of, I don't want to say criticisms, but I realized that Ribbon Candy Hooking, my company, does not put out new holiday patterns months in advance because I just can't work like that. At this point, being a one-person operation, I get a lot of help, right? But being just me at the wheel, with the design and all of the making part of it, I just can't work that far in advance. I cannot do when I go into Joann's or Michael's and I'm going for the Halloween fabric or whatever, and it's September and they've got the Christmas stuff set up, I can't even look at it or go near it. It just gets to me. I love celebrating all of the holidays, but in turn, in their place. So you'll never really see me working on new pieces that aren't for the upcoming holiday. I just personally don't work like that. So I always have past patterns, right? But I always bring out patterns during the time of the celebration because if I don't, I trip myself up. And I'm not excited enough, and I feel like the lack of passion and immediate excitement doesn't come through because it's not there yet. So I think that's what happened when I started hooking the popcorn party. I was on the Cape and it was still the summer. And I thought, you know what? I got distracted. I took out all of my tie-dye colored wool. And then I thought, what other color do I want to use besides all the tie-dyes? Of course, I'm thinking tie-dyes because we're all wearing tie-dye t-shirts because it's like 95 degrees and it's summer. And I'm running back and forth, swimming in the pond and running back to the house to hook with the kids. And everything's about tie-dye. So I thought, what else can I do besides tie-dye? And I thought, I'll do cranberries. I'll do the color cranberry or a range of cranberry colors because I'm on Cape Cod. The cranberry is like the god berry of Cape Cod. So I'm like, I'm going to do some tie-dye colors and cranberry colors. And this is what happened. I started hooking it and it just don't work. You see, it's a big piece, but you can see I got myself into some trouble. I was doing cranberry lines and stuff in between the tie-dye patterning, and it's just too much. It's just not going to work. So at a certain point, I switched to doing one of my other projects, and I've got to resolve it because I do see all the shades of cranberry I was using. It's like the lights and the darks here. That's the border design on the side where the popcorns are popping. And I do love the tie-dye. I just don't think that I love it for this project. The reason I'm showing you that is because I hope by next Halloween that I'll have figured out what I want to do with this project or figure out how to save it. I started hooking the background of the border in like an antique black, all different. These are all colors that I dyed, all different sort of colors of black. I wanted it to look a bit antique-y. I'm going to figure it out, but this wasn't right, and it just goes to show I'm not one for pulling stuff out. I'm gonna spend some time because I have some time. I have a whole year now because Halloween is next week. So a week from today, actually. So I'm going to think about that. But I'm just making the point that the best laid plans of mice and men, right, for all of us. I do this all the time. I do this for my job. And I still make all kinds of screwy, bad calls because I always go with like my passion, my love, my heart. And sometimes I don't go for, I'm not thinking technically enough. That is my big crime as a hooker. So we all know that story. And I will figure out how to fix that. And it will be great when it's done. But it might not have tie-dye and cranberry in it. It might have cranberry. It probably won't have tie-dye. I love the pattern too. I will figure it out. Everything we saw last night was a lot better. Because you all figured your stuff out. You solved all your problems before you sent me the pictures. But I've got so many projects that are partway done because I've made bad decisions. It's also like my life in general. I make a lot of bad decisions in my life. But the big ones are good ones, I think. All right, so let's see. Let's get going. We took this bus trip last week to, let me bring you to the slideshow for this morning. Um, I took this bus trip with my mother. Oh, you know what? Before we start, Melanie, I'm going to start with, I accidentally left off. Melanie sent a beautiful rug of the squirrel, right? The squirrel that's called Tis Autumn, which is the free ribbon candy hooking pattern, both on the ribbon candy hooking website and in our Facebook group. If you type it into either of those places, it will pull up a free PDF that you can download, size any way that you like, and use, right? It's a free pattern, and it's called Tis Autumn. And Melanie made a beautiful example of Tis Autumn, and I somehow missed it in the slideshows. So I want to show it right now because it really is a gem. It's a beautiful, beautiful rendition of this pattern. I love everything that you've done with color in such autumn colors too. Isn't it nice to put the year on something? It just feels so good to me to include the year. I like to do that as much as I can. It really gives it such a primitive kick too, doesn't it? I love the shape of the squirrel with this piece. I love the way you've got his nose buried in that little acorn. It really stands out. Oh, hey, Courtney. I really struggled with the acorn and hooking mine, which is in the other room, and I keep forgetting to bring it in here. It's pretty much at the same state you saw it at last time because I haven't gone any further with it. Completely different color palette for everybody who I've seen working on this palette, so on this pattern so far. But I love the way that you've done this. It's very ghostly. You've really popped the trees that are coming up behind the squirrel, those kind of ghost trees with the leaves already down. You've really made the shape of those skeletal branches echo the shape in the border. That worked out really, really well. I just love these dark colors that are framing them up. I love the patterned wool in the bottom corners. It looks like you use the same color, possibly the same material to whip the edges of it. So that frames that out really nice. And it's just a party with the lamb's tongues. You know, they have a bit of a sunflower look to them, right? Because some of them have that ring of the sunflower color. It's just so pretty. You did such a good job with this. I love this pattern. This is another one I'm probably going to come back to next autumn. Time got away from me quickly. I did do a lot of patterns this year, I have to say. That's one of the reasons I was tied up with time is I did a lot of new patterns this year for Halloween. And there's a very good reason for that. It's just still a bit of a secret. So I'll tell you about that project as soon as I can. This is absolutely beautiful, Melanie. I just love it. I love the color of your squirrel too. He's a much lighter gray. And what brought me to the idea of the squirrel is as I was visiting with my mom, and she's got the black squirrels out in the backyard. And you hardly ever see those. Those are my favorites. So I'm making mine as a black squirrel. They look like little fuzzy cats to me because they're so tiny. They're smaller than the rest of the squirrels around here. They're smaller than the gray ones, and they're a bit more aggressive. But they are like tiny little cats, and they are so cute. But I have seen mostly the gray squirrels around here, but I have seen white ones, like in the Carolinas when I was a tour guide. Occasionally we saw white ones again. They look like little cats because they look like the wrong shaped body, but that kind of movement, you know, that fast movement with the tail sticking up all crazy. So cute. This is so cute, Melanie. You did such a nice job. Oh, I hope so, Nancy. But if you don't, just let me know. Always let me know, right? I always like to do things really perfect and right. Oh, Linda sent an email after the show last night, too, to say thank you. To remember at the beginning of the show, Linda sent us a bunch, and she was so hesitant to send. It was like, oh, I don't think mine are as good as everybody else's, so I'm still practicing. Lots of like explaining. And I said, absolutely no need. These are beautiful. Remember all the skulls at the beginning that got us going on the conversation about the Day of the Dead? Those were Linda's. And then the two pumpkins, one of them with kind of that grayish purple background, the other more traditional orange pumpkin, absolutely beautiful. She sent me a message after the show. So when I got home and I sat down, opened the computer after the show, she sent this image, which I wanted to include. This is something else that she'd just done, and I just love it. It looks like, Linda, I'm not sure if you're on, but it looks like you're working on, oh, Linda, Linda, are these your pieces? I just want to check before I start shooting my mouth off. It looks like you're working on burlap. And if you are, I have to say I love that. I don't think we need to constantly be talking about the more expensive backings when burlap works great, particularly if you're not putting your rug on the floor. Water is the issue with deteriorating burlap. I think this is another beautiful piece, and I just wanted to sneak it in because it has that fall theme before we move a month away to our next gallery night. I just wanted to look at this. And Linda sent this after the show, and also her own scarecrow. Because remember, the show last night took us to the conversation on scarecrows and what they mean. Their meaning in life, their meaning out on the field, their meaning in design, their evolution as a motif that relates to the season and specifically to Halloween. And Linda said, "This is my scarecrow." And this is just another amazing example of a great piece of folk art. Any kind of scarecrow that you have going in your yard is a piece of folk art. It's just beautiful. I just loved it. Burlap is my favorite to use. Linda Ann, I love burlap too. I really do. And I do use burlap a lot. I don't kit it when I sell things because I know people have mixed feelings and it can be very controversial. But if I was living in the UK rather than the US, we would routinely be using burlap, and we would have been all along, and it would never be a conversation or a problem. It works really well, particularly if you're a beginner, wider cuts, thick yarn. All of that is going to work great in burlap. If you're using fine cuts, you're using really thin gauge yarn, then burlap is probably not the right thing for you. But interesting. I absolutely loved those photos, and I love getting messages after cocktail time because I'm all hyped up still too. I'm really hyped up after cocktail time. It's late. I've just driven home. Last night I couldn't find my keys. That was a classic. I got myself crying because I was ready to go and I was getting tired and I could not find my keys anywhere. And I'm alone in this. I shouldn't say I'm alone in this building at night when I do the night shows. There's not anybody in sight. I'm always nervous about going outside. And I got it into my head, right? This is all this Halloween talk. I got it into my head. I looked for my keys for about half an hour. I got it into my head that as soon as I opened the door and went into the hall, that's like an open space again, that someone was going to be standing there with my keys going like, "Are you looking for these?" And I was like, I just had it in my head that it was going to happen like that. I got myself so upset for no reason. So when I got home and I got some friendly messages, I was really happy. Now, we went over to the Currier Museum in New Hampshire. It's in Manchester, New Hampshire the other day on a bus trip. It was super fun. Super early. We had to leave the house at 6:30 to meet the bus at 7:30 in Springfield. And I thought this was the Currier and Ives Museum. It's not. I'm just a ding-dong. It's the Currier Museum. And like I said, there are some extraordinary pieces of artwork here. They are all really, it's very, very fun. This is me and my mom doing a selfie outside their little bus stop because they actually have a little, it's a conveyance. It's not quite a bus. It's a small bus. Shuttle. It's a shuttle. Right outside the Currier Museum because if you are local, it is so worth taking a trip to the Currier Museum. Amazing, important collection of fine art. A lot of moving exhibits of different kinds of art. Some textile art, including the now permanent Gee's Bend exhibit, and some other quilts they have in their permanent collection. I'm sure they rotate stuff on a regular basis, so ever changing. They have a beautiful big Palladian type courtyard inside with a lovely food area and wine and things to drink. Very atmospheric, very nice. And they have a shuttle outside because in the same town, and this is just an incredible, I guess, fluke and a great luck for the museum, you can visit the museum and then you can go outside to that shuttle stop where I took that picture. Burlap needs more love. That's true. I like that I love that hashtag. You go out to the little trolley and a guy drives you a few streets away, right? It's not walking distance, but still in Manchester. On one residential street in Manchester, New Hampshire, there are two Franklin Lloyd Wright houses. Two. And you can tour both of them because they both belong to the museum. And this is unrelated collection of art. They were related, right, at one time. These are all friends and people who had obviously money, sort of 1950s, 1960s, a little bit earlier with the houses. But, this community of people in Manchester who were collectors, knew each other, willing stuff to the museum, that kind of thing. And the Lloyd Wright houses, the first one was bought or given to the museum, right? So it's architectural. It's not really in line with the collection of art, but still art is art, something exciting and extra to look at that's right there in town. Trolley takes you out to this house, and I'll tell you, I'm not one for modern architecture, and I'm ashamed to say I've formerly had no interest in it at all. If it's not an early American house, it's not for me. Even Victorian houses for me are kind of like quite new. So I didn't think I'd have any interest in this part of the tour, but man, I was wrong. They took us in there, and this tiny little house, this ranch house built into the ground, right? All part of nature, thoughtfully placed with outcroppings of rocks and trees in certain positions, because it was all about like architecture fitting into nature for Franklin Lloyd Wright. The inside I thought would be super minimalist. It was actually incredibly beautiful. Lush layers, no corners. He even had like, he loved like chinois, like Chinese, Japanese art. Had things made, like needle things made, needle points, needlework, sewn things, and made them irregular, too long for the wall, so they wrapped around a corner, so there essentially were no corners showing. Everything kind of wrapped, even the windows wrapped into the corners. It was so interesting. And it was a couple who didn't have any children. They lived in this house. You could see lots of, like, there was a Steinway piano right in the main room. Very small house, but lots of parties obviously happened here. Just ripe for that mid-century cocktail party. Unbelievable. And apparently the neighbors, or people who they knew, decided that they wanted a Franklin Lloyd Wright house. So they got in touch with Lloyd Wright, and he said at that point his career was a little more advanced a few years later. He was getting sort of to the end of his life too, because he had a very long life, but he was right at the end of it at that point. He said, I'm not going to be doing any more sort of original designing, custom designing, but I do have these houses that I'm starting to make that are blocks, kind of like a Lincoln log set or a Lego set. And what I do is I send you the blocks and a plan to put the house together according to like your specs. You choose which design you want, but you put the blocks together yourself. You and your wife, you put the blocks together, and isn't that going to be fun? Or if you hit some kind of a weird speed bump, just have like one of the local builders help you put the blocks together. So this is that age, and I've touched on this before. Remember, we've talked a little bit about Thomas Edison's concrete houses that were poured, right? There's hardly any of those, and most of them are in New Jersey. It's the same era, like how to make a house quick. So the second house was a lot less beautiful, and it was made up of these blocks, and they had a hell of a time putting this house together. It was not a project for husband and wife. It was a project for many experienced builders and lots more expense. But it was so interesting. It was so interesting. So all of that happened at this little museum. Oh, Melanie says, I used to belong to a spinning guild in Oakland, California, and one of the members had a house built by his protege. Oh, how interesting. It is a different rabbit hole that I want to go into when I can really have the time. Because, maybe I'll show you some pictures on the next episode because I didn't load them today. But even the blocks that he pre-made, there was something like 21 blocks for one house. The molds, like you pour the concrete into the mold, and you put them together, and in between the blocks, you stack the blocks like Lego, and in between there's this pipe thing that goes like this at the cross between the corners of all the blocks. So it really holds them in place. And you pour, I guess, grout, maybe that's not the right word, into them. So the grout is going in between the seams. It's not showing up in between the tiles. And these are houses where the earth is meant to warm and cool the house. That's how they're built. So this is like early kind of solar engineering where the floor is supposed to remain hot because of the pipe work that was put down under it. Apparently it didn't work that well at that moment in time. The houses were not hugely comfortable year round, but just that early technology, looking at the way they looked, it was so funny. My mom and I had it like inappropriate laughing breakdown, like proper breakdown, like couldn't walk, couldn't stand up. We were just, because we went into the guest house behind the second house, which was very, very, very concrete. And with the exception of some textiles inside the house, all concrete, right? Like, I don't want to say it resembled a prison cell because it had charm and it had this artistic flavor that brutalist. It was that brutalist style of art. Even the art was very brutalist. We went into the guest house and there was nothing in there. It was just concrete floor, concrete walls, and this weird kind of block mold shape, and a fire extinguisher. And my mother said, what could they possibly need a fire extinguisher? There's like nothing flammable like on this entire property. And we started laughing. We were tired and hungry at that point, and a little bit crazy, but it was such a wonderful part to the museum. If you get the chance to go to this place, you must. It is such an amazing day out. And even for somebody like me that's really focused on folk art and early American everything, I didn't think this was going to hit my sweet spot at all. And it was such an inspiring day. Highly recommend. Melanie says it was beautiful. It was built on a wooded lot, and they built modules between the trees. Didn't take out a single tree. Amazing. I think it was the same thing here. And one of the questions, I'm the idiot that is like this every time someone's talking. I've just got my hand up waiting for a question. Must be super annoying. I have to keep that in check. But one of the questions I asked when we were looking at one of the Franklin Lloyd Wright houses was how much did he consider the land that the house was going to sit on when he was making the plans for the house? Because it looked to me, when I approached the house, I saw this weird rambling ranch that honestly looked like a bunch, the bricks looked like a bunch of ashtrays, like all the same design with like pressed corners, like a finger thing in each corner, just concrete light gray color with like a pressed finger mark in each corner. It looked like a bunch of ashtrays put together to me. Not in a bad way, but that was the aesthetic. It was immediate connotation, ashtrays. And I thought, man, that's a lot of ashtrays here with a few outcroppings of rock, and then very Maxfield Parrish style out the top of this low house. Of course, it was built into the hill, so most of the house was behind. It looked like what you weren't even able to stand up in the house. It was so low. Out the top, all of these trees, right, like tall and skinny, very Art Nouveau style. And I thought, man, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, for me, it was like the house is a bunch of ashtrays, but just the way that it looked in on that piece of land with the outcroppings and the trees sticking up was like, whoa, it like stopped your heart for a second. And they said, yeah, that was a huge consideration. Was they even made that house the only house on the street that was turned to a certain angle, like not the natural angle facing the road, to make sure that the rocks were in the right position to optimize the look of those tall trees and then the rocks in the front yard. So interesting. So interesting. So when we took this photo, we were outside waiting to take the shuttle. No, we weren't. We were about to go in the museum. We had to break into twos because our group was large. So we went into the museum first, and after going through the gift shop at length, because of course, isn't that what you do first? We started looking at, oh, this was the exhibit that was outside, the Gee's Bend Quilts Recent Acquisitions on View Now. So this poster was outside at that little shuttle stop. We went inside. I took some pictures of the text too, so that you can even look back on this show. I'm not going to read all of the plaques that they gave us, but I'm going to give you some of my own commentary, and you can pause the video later if you want to look at this in great depth. There are 5 Gee's Bend quilts. They all have tremendous value. So this is even at 5, this is a large collection. You can go back and read the plaques if you want to, as if you were there with us, standing next to us, reading the plaques when we did. But this is the first one that we saw. I'm going to show you the plaque for this right after. This is a twill and denim Gee's Bend quilt. So one of these quilts are made, let me start this way. Let me start with some of the research I did so we know what we're about to look at. These are very, very unusual, unique, esteemed folk art quilts, right? This is considered contemporary folk art because they're still being made at the highest height of the craft. There's a lot of history that goes with these Gee's Bend quilts, and that's the part that I want to share with you now because I think it's going to make it more meaningful to look at some of these quilts together. I got this part off Wikipedia. The quilts of Gee's Bend are quilts created by a group of women and their ancestors who live or have lived in the isolated African American hamlet of Gee's Bend, Alabama, along the Alabama River. The quilts of Gee's Bend are among the most important African American visual and cultural contributions to the history of art within the United States. That is a sweeping statement, and I'm going to say I think it's still an understatement. Alonzia Petway and Anna Mae Young and Mary Lee Bendoff are among some of the most notable quilters from Gee's Bend. Many of the residents in the community can trace their ancestry back to the enslaved people from the Petway plantation. Of course, remember, a lot of slaves took the name of the person who owned them. In other parts of the country, like New England, I'm not going to get into a conversation about slavery, of course, because that is rife for misunderstanding. But at least in early America, a lot of New England families formally adopted slaves and indentured servants, both distinct and different, but both, into their families and shared their names. I'm guessing, I don't know a lot about the history of Alabama, but I'm guessing that the names were given because they were slaves. I'm not sure in these situations in the South that they are being adopted. I don't know. I would love to know. Have not had time to research why there are so many crossover names with the plantation name in this case. But again, very touchy subject, so I'm going to back it up. Many of the residents, Arlonzia Petway can recall her grandmother's stories of her ancestors, specifically Dinah Miller, who was brought to the United States by a slave ship in 1859. That is late. That is late. So I'm going to do a little bit more on the history, and then we're going to look at some more of the slides. Just southwest of Selma, in the Black Belt of Alabama, Black Belt is a place to Google, right? That's not a term, it's a place. Gee's Bend, which is officially called Boykin, B-O-Y-K-I-N, is an isolated royal community, about 700 inhabitants there. The area is named after Joseph Gee, G-E-E, a landowner who came to North Carolina and established a cotton plantation in 1816 with his 17 slaves. In 1845, the plantation was sold to Mark Petway, P-E-T-T-W-A-Y. Many members of the community still carry that name. After emancipation, many freed slaves and family members stayed on the plantation as sharecroppers. Now here's where the story takes several awful turns. In the 1930s, Gee's Bend saw a significant shift in their community as a merchant who had given credit to the families of the Bend died, and the family of this merchant collected on debts owed to him in a brutal fashion. These indebted families, because they are poverty-stricken people, watched as their food, animals, tools, and seed were taken away, and the community was only saved by the distribution of Red Cross rations. Much of the land of this area was sold to the federal government, and the Farm Security Administration and those organizations set up Gee's Bend Farms, Inc. Thank God for that. This is like an amazing thing to happen at this point in time. We're talking about the 1930s. We're talking about people who care about black people in the 1930s, right? This is extraordinary. A pilot project that was a cooperative-based program intended to help sustain the inhabitants of the area. This is the Gee's Bend Farms Project. The government sold tracts of land to the families of the Bend, thus giving the Native and African American population control over the land. So let me say that again. The government bought the land and then gave the people who were living there, Native and African American people, control over the land. That just did not happen at this time. It just did not happen. Extremely rare. During the later half of the Great Depression, the inhabitants of the area faced more challenges as farming practices became increasingly mechanized, and consequently, a large part of the community left, right? Could no longer turn a buck farming because farming had changed. Many of the inhabitants of the community stayed. In 1949, there was a U.S. post office that was established at Gee's Bend, so that's 49. But then another downturn in 1962 where ferry service is canceled. Right, so now they're more now they have a post office, but now they're more isolated. Colleen, great to see you. Oh, thank you. TJ Maxx or Marshalls, one of those, right? So now they are extremely. I mean, these poor. It's beyond these poor people, isn't it? Among the other effects, the hindered residents' ability to vote was essentially taken away because they had like no communication or transportation to where you would go to vote. So that was not a possibility until 2006. 2006, when the ferry service was restored, right? And they're connected to the world again. So 1962 to 2006, they are extremely isolated, and there are still people living there. From the 1960s onward, the community of Gee's Bend, as well as the Freedom Quilting Bee in nearby Alberta, gained attention for their production of quilts. Folk art collector and historian and curator William Arnett brought further attention to this artistic production with his, and this is a foundation, Souls Grown Deep Foundation in Atlanta, Georgia. Arnett organized an exhibit called The Quilts of Gee's Bend, which debuted in 2002 at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and it later traveled to a dozen, now it's much more than a dozen, other locations across the country. The exhibition featured 60 quilts created by 45 artists. This exhibition brought fame to the quilts. The quilting tradition at Gee's Bend goes back to the 19th century and may have been influenced in part by patterned Native American textiles and also remembered African textiles. and you're going to see this in the designs when I start the slideshow in a minute. African American women pieced together strips of cloth to make bed covers. Throughout the post-bellum years and into the 20th century, Gee's Bend women made quilts to keep themselves and their children warm in unheated shacks that lacked running water, telephones, and electricity. Along the way, they developed a distinctive style, noted for its lively improvisations and geometric simplicity. Many of the quilts are a departure from classical quilt making, bringing to mind a minimalist quality. This could have been influenced by the isolation of their location, which necessitated using whatever materials they had on hand, and recycling old clothing and old textiles. So this is another form of making art, making folk art by thrifting. This is another great example, just like rug hooking. This is a classic quilting example of thrifting. The reception of this work, right? Because these quilts are not formal quilts. They are not done in the traditional way. They are not done with rulers and T-squares. These are done by hand, piecing tiny strips together or whatever you had together. We are not talking about color plans, right? We are just talking about something that evolves in your hand or on your lap as you go, right? Without a plan, color plan or pattern plan. The reception of the work has been mostly positive. I took this quote out because I really like this. As Alvia Wardlaw, curator of the Modern and Contemporary Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, wrote, this is a quote from her, and I think this says it all. The compositions of these quilts contrast dramatically with the ordered regularity associated with many styles of Euro-American quilt making. There's a brilliant improvisational range of approaches to composition that is more often associated with the inventiveness and power of the leading 20th century abstract painters more than it is with textile making. That quote says it all. So let's look at what some of these look like. This is the first one I was showing you that is at the Currier Museum. This one is quite tidy compared to many that you're about to see. So this is made of denim and twill. The twill are the colored parts. All of the blue you're seeing in the gray colors, that's all jeans. That's all denim. This is pretty squared. You can see it flares a little bit on the bottom. I don't think there are any Gee's-Bend quilts that are a geometric perfection shape of a rectangle or square, right? None of them, their borders are not even. That is one of the irregularities. That is one of the improvisational effects of piecing as you go. But they are using materials that they can find. They have done that historically, and they work this way to this day. This is the plaque that goes with that quilt we were looking at. Denim and twill. It's called Housetop. The name of the quilt was made in 2004 by Louisiana Bendoff, right? Born in the U.S. in 1960. So she is 62 at this point and making quilts. This is another one that they have in the collection. This is more like a log cabin quilt, but if you look at it closely, the idea is log cabin. Like the inspiration was the maker saw a log cabin quilt and knew kind of how it went together. But a lot of these are stretched, pinched, elongated, exaggerated. This is not a traditional log cabin quilt. And you can see how it did not come out even. And a blue border was put diagonally on the bottom to make it look more even. Because at this point, these quilts are worth a lot of money. And, knowing that people are going to hang them as wall art, I guess depending from maker to maker, this is the piece that, this is a close-up of that one. From maker to maker, they might be trying to make them look more regular in terms of geometry. Or not. We're going to see some that are very or not. You can see the range of materials that are in here. It looks like both clothing material and household material. Possibly also commercial materials like packaging, feed sack type materials. Absolutely possible. This is the information that, for me, I put the slide in that follows the picture we were looking at. So Geraldine Westbrook, 1919 to 2016. Housetop quilt, same name as the last one, made around 1965, cotton, double knit, and polyester. So this is the third one that is currently at the Currier Museum. This is part of their permanent collection, new acquisition, all 5 quilts. This one really shows how irregular these quilts can be. The inside is absolutely perfect, right? Well, for the most part, right? For star patterns are always extremely technically difficult to quilt. And I'm thinking they're quilting them by hand. The star part is absolutely perfect. We run into some trouble where we hit the squares, but it is an interesting part of the design. We hit those oversized squares, right, partway out of the star pattern, going out to the corners, the edges of the star. Interesting. No attempt at all to make this one regular in terms of the border, the outline shape. Interesting. Interesting. Doesn't it feel good to look at a piece like this and think, it's not perfect, but that person was at peace with saying, it's good. It's good the way that it is. It's perfect the way that it is. I'm not going to add anything. This is it, right? That's folk art, right? It depends on how you feel about what you make and what styles you like. I'm of the school where, hey, if the border isn't perfect, that is more than okay for me. That feels like folk art. It reminds me of our roots, in thrift craft and making 19th century things out of nothing and just making something of beauty that's functional, and you're not worried about those technical details. There are a lot of technical details to this particular piece, but overall you can see it's fairly noticeable, right, that the irregularity of the border. This is the Magaline Wilson, 1898. Wow, that's a good long life, isn't it? She lived 1898. Wow, so she would have probably been the child of slaves that were immediately taken and brought. And she died in 2001. She saw the millennium. Isn't that? Oh, gonna choke myself up. That's a life. This piece is called Broken Star. It probably had special symbolism for her, made around 1925. Cotton, wool, and silk. Taking a deep breath. I just want to look at it one more time because I bet the broken part of those squares she's put in. And again, I bet they have some kind of meaning for her. This is all the information we get on this particular one. At least here, there are books on the Gee's Bend quilts. The books on the Gee's Bend quilts are quite expensive. You can find them on eBay and Amazon. Collections of photos, picture books, and coffee table books about Gee's Bend. They're expensive, so be prepared for some sticker shock. They are not produced in large numbers, so you're always looking at limited number runs. And if you love the subject and you need everything written about it, you're getting into some money. But what a prize you get when you pay, right? You pay out and you get something, a real treasure. This is another one. This is the fourth one that they had hanging, all on this paprika colored wall. They have the paprika colored wall going through the textile area, and I think that's such an unusual choice. I have this color in my dining room right now. This color wall is also the color wall of our living room when I was growing up. I love this color. It feels like a warm neutral to me, even though I know it's a really bright color. It's a spicy color. I think most of the quilts that are in this room are African American quilts. Gee's Bend and also the Faith Ringgold. So I think that might have been the reason they chose a nice warm spicy color, but it really works well, I think, with all of the quilts. This one is extraordinary to me because this is my favorite one, not color-wise. It was, Melanie, it's beautiful, the stitching on the star. So fine, right? So perfect. This one is so unusual to me. I mean, if you look at each block, this is not a traditional block, right? This is not one you're going to find in your block Bible. There are so many books of indexes and Bibles of quilt blocks, so we know the names of them and the history of the different blocks. This is not one of them. Somebody made this. Let's find out who. I don't want to say somebody because that sounds really, really disrespectful. Let me just go to the next slide so we know who somebody is. I'll show you that closer up. Nettie Young. 1916 to 2010 fragmented star quilt made in 1937. So Nettie came up with this block idea and she repeated it at different angles, right? The orientation of each of the blocks is turned and twisted, tessellated, right? You could call this an early tessellated quilt. Tessellation becomes a thing after the artist Escher, right? It becomes a thing in quilting in the 1980s and 1990s. This is a 1930s tessellated quilt. Come on, this is crazy. What a beautiful shape for a block. I think I want to make a quilt with this block and call it the Nettie block. Maybe I'll make a pattern for that. Maybe I'll sneak half an hour in this afternoon and make some kind of a rug hooking pattern with the Nettie block. I'll have to tidy it up a little bit for us in rug making. But I just love the idea that she pieced this kind of very Picasso. I'm sure she would have no exposure to Picasso. But she pieced this probably leaf pattern herself, and she was experimenting with the color. It's a very simple maple leaf, three-pointed leaf. But I just love the way it came out. I love the way that this textile bends and morphs and twists because the blocks are not even. So there is some distortion, but I love the distortion. Look at how she gets to the bottom, and there is some kind of trouble with spacing, and she just adds rows of this kind of gingham check. And she's got it in two colors. It's probably a curtain material or like a bedding material, this check in the yellow and the blue, but it's the same print essentially. She's got that running through some of the bottom ones. She must have run out of her solid material, and she's going to borders, and she's making it work, and she's making it as rectangular as she wants it, or as much as she can. I guess we don't know which one, but absolutely beautiful. Those little yellow stars that appear in it up top, kind of interrupting the blue. Just smart, natural design sense. Absolutely brilliant natural instincts. Yeah, this does look like some kind of home woven textile, like a tablecloth material or something, doesn't it? It's actually a beautiful material, beautiful looking homespun. So this is a close up, and you can see there is not just piecing of the blocks, right? There's quilting. Quilting, you piece it, you put the top part together, you put whatever your quilt layer is of batting or cotton or wool or whatever you've got in the middle that's going to give it the fluff. And then you put your back piece on, and you need to sew all three pieces together. The act of sewing all three pieces together, the batting, the front and the back, that is called quilting. You make a quilt. Once you have quilted the three pieces together, you've attached them by sewing through the three layers. So they are now one piece, one textile. You can see the lines of the quilting done here. You can see they're done in like maybe white or similar color. But you can see there's lots of directional hand sewing in this quilt that make it, that's the quilted part of the quilt, right? So 1937, absolutely amazing. And I think this is the last one in the collection at the Currier Museum, and I thought this was extraordinary as well. This is a log cabin pattern, but the person who has made it, and let's check on this too. Let's be personal here. Oops, no. It's asking if I want to delete. I do not want to delete. This is made by Lucy Mingo. She makes quite a few. She was born in 1931. Her name's going to come up again. This is Log Cabin Crosscut Saw Quilt, made in 1962 from cotton and wool. So let's come back and look. This is a log cabin block that is pretty traditional in the way that it's made. It's made as a log cabin, right? It's not distorted or exaggerated or twisted in any way. It's pretty straightforward log cabin, but it has been done with the Amish trick of, and I don't know if Lucy would have had any exposure to this, but the Amish trick of using light and dark or shadows and light, right, depending on who's writing the book. In other words, when you make one square, half of the square is all darks and half of the square is all lights. And when you piece them together, you get patterns. And diagonal stripes is one of the patterns that you can easily get making a simple log cabin quilt in the lights and darks, right? The shadows and light. So this is a great example of a more traditional, more sort of by the book traditional quilting pattern, but obviously still done by hand, still done with small strips, still admiring the variety of the different materials that are in here. You see the wool flannel and the plaid. You see lots of cottons. You see lots of hand sewing. You're getting some very small print calicos that were popular, from the 1930s to the 1960s. We see different range of calicos in the 1980s. Lots of different materials represented. Lots of hand sewing. So then I kind of took a departure because those were the 5 that the Currier Museum had, and I thought, man, that got me. Like that was just, I also got the puzzle that I want to make with the kids, the Gee's Bend puzzle. It's like a ton of the Gee's Bend quilts on a white background. So I figured that's going to be a really fun one to make, probably challenging too, because there's so many quilts represented. I'll take some pictures when we start working that puzzle. So I went down the rabbit hole a little bit late last night and early this morning because I wanted to show you a few more of these Gee's Bend quilts. I think this is such an important moment in time, and to know that this is something that people did not talk about, know about, honor, celebrate, or look at until well into the 21st century, right? Such an isolated area, such a horrible, harrowed history for these poor people. And meanwhile, one of these strands that is running through their lives as women is that they are quilting for warmth. And they are making these very irregular quilts. And at some point, as the story went earlier in the episode, they are seen, right? This guy, Arnett, the curator, sees them and puts them on display, and that is the break that they needed, because there needed to be a middleman who has the time, interest, and funds to bring this work to a broader audience so that more people can see it. Once more people see it, like that quote I read earlier, mostly positive reviews, right? These are not technically perfect quilts. That's part of the charm of them. The story is part of the charm of them. It's a huge rabbit hole for you to go down. This is one of the other ones I wanted to pull into the show today. This was made in 1979, also by Lucy Mingo. So the last one we looked at was by Lucy Mingo. So is this one. So this is a very different one, where she started with a 9-patch in the middle of the block. Linda Ann, I love these. I'm so loving these. Love the colors, love the energy. She started with a 9-patch in the middle, and for whatever reason, she decided to do something else. And she went from the 9-patch to just doing blocks of stripies, right? And then she put her blocks together, and almost in a log cabin configuration, right? You see the border after border after border, and she chose the directions for the stripes according to her eye and her taste. It's another irregular border. This is one of the things that distinguishes the Gee's Bend quilts, right? If you're a quilter, you're used to using your rulers, right? We don't make a move without our see-through rulers and our T-squares. Everything has to be squared and perfect. Not in Gee's Bend, right? This is so liberating to me, looking at these, especially as wall art. It's like, it's so much, it's an irregular border. It adds interest. It adds excitement. It adds a mood, doesn't it? It adds a naivete. It ticks that folk art box in a huge way. So this is another Lucy Mingo that I thought was just extraordinary. Let me show you some of the others I pulled offline, and I'm sure many of you are going to go down this rabbit hole today. I'm sure you've heard of these quilts. This one was, oh, this is a photo from 1937, right? So this is right around the time, well, actually, no, it's earlier. It's 12 years before the U.S. Post Office was set up in Gee's Bend. So they are still very isolated. There is a ferry service, but what to wear, right? And who's using it. This is still going to be a very dark time for them. This is the payback time, right, where the guy died and then his relatives are collecting, like Ebenezer Scrooge style, collecting and taking stuff away. So farming becomes almost impossible. And here are people trying to make it work, trying to make quilts in 1937. Here's one that was made by, Emma Petway. So again, using the last name. I'm having a lot of problems with this program right now. All right, Emma Petway, very dynamic one. Don't have a year on this. This is a contemporary one. I'm sorry. This Emma Petway and Lacarian Petway. So this is the work of two people. This is a combined joint effort. This is currently for sale, as are many of the Gee's Bend quilts, on a site called Marfa Stance. So MarfaStance.com, marfastance.com. This is available for, as are many of the others, for $25,000. So that is the kind of money that we're talking about. In a very small amount of years, in a couple of decades, these quilts went from being on people's beds, keeping them alive, to selling for $25,000. So if you have that money and you love these quilts and you love this story, you want to support them, this is a good thing to do. It reads, a unique juxtaposition of colors and fabrics. This striking blanket is the result of many hours of work by Emma Petway and Lacarian Petway, artisans of Gee's Bend, a community of Black women quilters in Louisiana. So it goes on to describe a little bit about Gee's Bend. We covered that earlier in the episode. Due to the nature of this philanthropic collaboration and the special edition one-of-a-kind pieces, in which proceeds go directly to fund the quilters and community manager in the Bend, all purchases will be final and non-refundable. So this is one of the quilts that is available on Marfa Stance, and this one is as well. This is made by Castor Petway and Teresa Fuller, also $25,000. I know we're on the late side, so I'm going to race through the rest of the slides. This is the one that we just looked at. This must be Castor Petway or Teresa Fuller working on that very quilt. And you can scroll through these later. The U.S. Postal System made stamps of the Gee's Bend quilts, right? So maybe you notice these. These are stamps of the quilts. These are, I think, a couple of the ones that we've seen already. I'm just going to go through the slideshow. I didn't put commentary for all of these. I just found random images of G-Spend quilts online, right? Easy to find for you too. This is kind of a take on a flying geese, but with oversized triangles too. So, and directional flow is very different on this. It's very irregular. Lots of these are for sale currently. Some there was at least one that was on Etsy as well, so you might want to check that out. But you can see that comment from that curator at the beginning, how the sort of lack of balance, symmetry, lack of squareness is one of the things that distinguishes these quilts, right? Does not take away from their beauty or the skill in making them, but definitely distinguishes them. The graphic quality of them as well. You know what? I'm going to stop here because I have a few more slides. I feel like I'm rushing it, and it's not fair to rush a subject like this. I want to pick this up again. Let me think about when. We covered the history of it, but I want to look at these quilts as design as well, because the colors and the shapes in these quilts, whether you're a quilt maker or a rug maker, translate very well into what you do and the designing that you already do. The idea that you can start a project, right, without having a table full of tools and pre-cut stuff around you, work it out as you go, end up with a proper piece of folk art that is not absolutely perfect. This is an idea that we shouldn't rush. So I'm going to put the brakes on right now because I do have a lot of the episode left. I didn't realize my mouth was going to run that much, and it's already 1. I got to get going on the finishing up the fairy tale class so I can get that document out to you tomorrow. Those of you who are taking that, I will be back with you on Wednesday. I might put this conversation on hold because I have other textiles to show you from the collection, some crazy quilts and stuff from the collection at the Currier Museum as well. I might put this conversation on hold to a week from today, because a week from today is Halloween. So maybe next week, because I was thinking this coming Wednesday, I want to do a story episode. I have a Lizzie Borden rug that I designed last year or the year before. I've been to her house many times. Lizzie Borden took an axe, right? So I want to do an episode that's like bordering on a Halloween episode again, looking at the design of that rug. I want to show you how far I've gotten with that rug and do a little bit on that very horrific story, but I feel like it fits into this month of Halloween. It's a bit of a horror story, but I wanted to look a little bit at Lizzie Borden and do a bit of a story episode on Wednesday. And then on Friday, I think we're going to have it's going to be a night that we haven't done before, a kind of trivia game night, drawing night, where you will be, and I'll describe this to you again on Wednesday. I want to pick up our conversation that we left off over a week ago when we did our witches episode. We started the conversation on the idea of the Halloween witch, like as a fortune teller, as a gypsy. I know that's not the right word anymore, but that is the word that was used then. That kind of prophet type character. And people started asking questions during that episode. It was a live episode of Cocktail Time about Ouija boards, tarot cards, things like that. I want to go down that rabbit hole on Friday and do an impromptu game night where we do trivia. And I want you to have a pad next to you and a pencil, because we're going to do a bunch of drawing games looking at the design aesthetics in the history of tarot cards and board games that have to do with Halloween, with fortune telling. So it's going to be another cozy episode on Friday. It's going to be game playing, it's going to be trivia, and it's going to be like a mini drawing class too, where you can work on some design ideas. So this is a full week for us. On Monday, I'm certainly going to run one last Halloween themed episode, and then we'll come back to textiles, quilts, and G-Spend next Wednesday, as soon as we get past that Halloween bump. So I will see you then. Make sure that you're signed up for the fairy tale class. You'll be getting that document tomorrow. I'm finishing all that work up today. It's going to be a wonderful class. You're going to leave with your head filled with ideas and inspiration. If you need me in the meantime, I'm at ribboncandyhooking@gmail.com. Look for me there. Otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday for coffee time at our usual time, noon Eastern Standard Time. I will see you then. Oh, Doreen, you said, Deana, did you make the witch head that's on the mantle? No, this witch head? No, I didn't. I bought this at the Halloween fair at the Providence Flea Market this weekend. This is the girl who did this. Her company. I think she's in Rhode Island or Massachusetts. It's on this old kind of candlestick thing, and she's got all kinds of rope here. You see how there's like some safety pins for the mouth. She's sewn the nose and painted it a bit. Her company, I think, is called the Rusty Nail. And this is fabric, almost like paper mache. It's stitched. There's a huge amount of stiffener in there. But isn't that great? And then some, this looks like yarn, but kind of like, what do you call this stuff? It's like the burlappy stuff, right? Like twine, right? Like a little bit of spun twine for the hair. But no, I'd love to make stuff like this. Maybe when the kids are older, right? But yeah, she made that, and she made this little witch here. I got that, and I got the little witch that's in the frame up there. She made and she made, let me show you this, and then I'm going to log off. She made this too. How cute is that? It's a little sheep made from like little candle wick bedspread using nails for the hooves. Cute little witch on horseback. Just a bunch of hocus pocus, her dress says. Look at that little face that she stitched. How cute is that? Come on, you. Come into focus. There she goes. Isn't that precious? A little bit of like roving in the hair. But I thought, yeah, that's going to go right there. For a few more days anyway. A few more days. All right. Hey, I will see. I love her too. I will see you all on Wednesday for coffee time. Have a great time in between. And actual quilting, stitching, just beautiful on